have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roller with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait to next year we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how do you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast.
Welcome back to the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast, powered by Fantasy Points Media Group. This is episode 97. As always, joined with Major Caldwell. Catch him on Sundays with Fantasy Points during the morning show. And catch Tera Roberts just about everywhere and anywhere. She stayed up late last night with Bob Harris. You could have caught her on XM Radio. She's on Fantasy Alarm, Fantasy Pros, Fantasy Points, Fantasy Vipers, you name it, that's where she's at. This afternoon, we have one of the great ones joining us. He is a writer over at Yahoo. He is an esteemed novelist. That's right. He's much more than just a fantasy writer. His writing has been recognized by the Associated Press's sports editors, the American Library Association, and the New York Public Library. Some even call him El Presidente as the president of the Fantasy Sports Writers Association, the fantasy monster of Midway. And today's guest, as we go behind the grind, Andy Behrens. How you doing, Andy?
I'm doing great. That Viper animation scared the hell out of me. That was shocking.
Well, we're very strong believers in fake it till you make it. It all comes down to a great introduction and great graphics to kind of go with it. So glad you enjoyed that. And we've got the people already coming in here. Everyone knows Jean-Luc there. I can't pronounce that. I'm not fluent in any other language. I can't even speak English properly, let alone what I can only assume is French.
Yeah.
Andy, as the show goes on, we talk about, we have a little bit of an area where we do a little bit of contractual obligated football talk. We are 7 weeks going into week 7 here of the fantasy football season, of the NFL season. We just had ourselves an interesting game last night with the Cleveland Browns, Denver Broncos. What did you learn in that game?
I guess, first of all, the Broncos are cooked, right? Like the Broncos are done. And maybe that's too dramatic an overreaction, but you look at the matchups they had the last 2 weeks. They faced a Raiders team that was in total disarray, lost their coach, right? Lost the defining character within the organization, and they get run off the field in that game. And then the defense barely shows up against Cleveland's essentially the junior varsity, right? The Broncos defensive front just blown up by Cleveland's offensive line. I mean, it wasn't even a contest. These last 2 weeks have been embarrassing for Denver, I think. And they're 3-4 now, on their way to, I don't know. They've got some matchups coming up. They've got like the whole NFC East coming up. It's going to get rough. They're going to be like 3-9 in a hurry. Doesn't look good for Denver. Beyond that, I hardly know what to say. Like the quarterback play wasn't good. We didn't expect it to be good on Cleveland's side. It wasn't. Teddy was compromised. I'm not totally sure he was the right choice in that game. Like whatever you think the difference is between Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, it's not great enough that you wouldn't just play the other guy if one guy is hurt, right? So I'm not sure that Teddy needed to be playing in that game to do him any favors. He didn't look great. It was just a rough watch all around.
And I know Tera, she loves to get to the waivers, never on time, but she loves to get to the waivers. We had our favorite, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. The Ernest Johnson stepping up in a big way. Everyone remembers last year going out and blowing their fob or fab or whatever you want to call it. I never pronounce it properly either. Spent it all there, kind of backfired on us. This time, spent that money, looked pretty good.
Yeah, and it's funny. The running joke is that we have our Tuesday show, and every Tuesday night, I forget we end at like 10 o'clock, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't run waivers yet. Crazy. But yeah, boy, Ernest Johnson, I guess he kind of proved fantasy football Twitter wrong. I know we were kind of sitting there a little skeptical of how he was going to work out, but he looked fantastic. I mean, what a game. Amazing.
He got a free run at the line of scrimmage all the time too, right? Like nobody was ever meeting him in the backfield. I mean, that was just part of the embarrassing scenario for the Broncos generally, I think.
Yeah, I was just in the Browns line being like one of the better offensive lines in all of football. Like what they did last night was a clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And with injuries too, I guess, we learned a lot about Kevin Stefanski as well and his coaching ability.
Yeah, and you know what? They're not the only team that's been hit hard by injuries. You look at what the Bucs are going through already. Going into this week, they've already ruled out AB. They've already ruled out Gronk. Richard Sherman's already been ruled out. Levante David's been ruled out. Let's talk about some of these key injuries there, Andy, that you're looking at here. And this is all happening during Bimageddon.
Yeah, right. On the Bucs side, though, they're so deep and they have such redundancy in that receiving core, right? It's like a little bit of a road bump, but it's not. It doesn't even feel like that big a deal, right? I think that game is particularly interesting, actually, and this is kind of veering away from your question about injuries, but I think it's particularly interesting on the Bears side because the Bears haven't Justin Fields hasn't passed the ball more than 27 times in any game this season. And there is a very clear game plan to not that you're going to beat Tampa Bay, but right, if you want to compete with Tampa Bay, like we've seen several teams this season not even attempt to run. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to throw Khalil Herbert into that Tampa defensive front 26 times? You're not going to win. He's going to get 44 yards out of that, right? Right. So you're going to have to put the ball in the air in this game. They haven't really done it all year. If Allen Robinson doesn't go off here, it's just like it's not going to happen. If they don't get to 40 pass attempts in this game, in this matchup, it's never going to happen.
So I did want to kind of touch on that a little bit. In our bold prediction segment here, I boldly predicted that both Darnell Mooney and Allen Robinson would hit 17 fantasy points in this matchup. So I went bold and I took both of them here. Now, that said, is Allen Robinson still quarterback proof?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Like he can be quarterback proof, but nobody is immune to game plans that have almost no pass volume, right? Like the Bears are playing this is like a 1978 offense, right? They're putting the ball in the air 20, 25 times a game. That's just not modern football. And if that persists against Tampa, then there's really no hope. Like Allen Robinson at 5 or 6 targets per game is just not going to cut it. And I thought we would really see a jump in pass volume last week against Green Bay because it's a different version of kind of the same story. Green Bay can get to 30 points against anybody. Tampa can get to 40 points against anybody, right? You're not seriously going to try to attack that team by running the ball into one of the best defensive lines in football. We're like, if Allen Robinson actually does get to like 900 or 1,000 receiving yards this year, he should just go straight to Canton. He should just go absolutely straight to the Hall of Fame.
So obviously, everyone who's watching this knows that you're a Bears fan, right? You're from that Chicago area. You grew up there. What are you looking forward to this week, maybe in this matchup or some of these other games for your fantasy rosters?
Oh gosh, what else? I wouldn't say that I'm looking forward to this Bears game. I'm dreading this Bears game, right? Because this was the game last year where Tom Brady became a meme, right? He held up the 4 fingers, didn't know what down it was, and all that. So I'm sure that Brady is going to come out and minimum put 4 touchdowns on Chicago, right? I'm just sort of dreading that. It's the thing we want to learn is whether they trust Justin Fields enough to throw the ball 35 times. That's kind of my big thing in this matchup. Aside from that, I guess I want to see how real. Like I can't. This is a weird game to say that I can't wait to see, but that Indy game I'm super interested in because Carson Wentz has been like sneaky good for 3 weeks in a row. Like it was 3 games in a row with double-digit touchdowns. He has the best passer rating in the league right now on deep throws, which is not something I thought we would be saying about Carson Wentz at almost the midpoint of the season. So I'm super interested in that. I think we may have weather in that game, so that could complicate things a bit. But that's interesting as well to me.
He gets Ty back, right?
Hopefully.
Okay.
Ty is like 50-50. He actually kind of downplayed the injury after last week's game. But yeah, you give him a full complement of receivers and both Pittman, Ty. They're using Mo Alley Cox a little bit more. It's not like he's running a ton of routes or anything, but they have him at least on the field in the like right areas. So I'm pretty optimistic about that, and I'm always interested in what San Francisco does.
Yeah, they're major. I don't know if you're getting your weather gear ready for that, but there's supposed to be some heavy rain forecasted in that one there in San Francisco. A little bit further to that, with T.Y. Hilton, are we sure T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell aren't the same player? I know Campbell came on for like one play, but I don't think either of them have been healthy for the same game since Campbell came into the league. So,
hey, no Paris Campbell slander. That's my guy.
That's my guy too. I can, like every year. I'm going to do it again next year too.
I have him in every league. I have him in every league.
You know, I'm not one to judge here. I've still got Josh Gordon roster on just about every dynasty roster I have.
Oh, Matt.
we're degenerates. That's all. That's what it sums up to. Like, we're just degenerate.
It's at that point where I'm waiting for that one breakout game just so I can like flaunt it and do my victory lap. And it's been since like 2013 since he did anything. But I'm going to celebrate when he does, if he does, which probably won't happen. Now, that is basically how we're summarizing up. That's a perfect way to kind of cue out of the football talk and move into the real talk here. And we're going to kick this off with one of Calvin's favorite questions. Calvin couldn't be with us here today, but he kind of starts this show off. There goes, what would your intro music be? If you're coming in to close a game in the ninth, if you're coming out there to a little bit of a WWE kind of thing, or, you're getting ready for one of those long distance runs with those short shorts, what are you queuing up?
This guy's ridiculous, man.
Nice.
Oh man, that's a really good question. I would have to give that some thought. I would feel like a fraud if I didn't pick the Replacements were very much my band when I was a kid, right? When I was like in high school and college, and I would feel like a bit of a fraud if I didn't pick a Replacement song. So I could go with Can't Hardly Wait. I could go with Nightclub Jitter, something like that. It'd be something like that.
I don't even know what John's talking about here. Oompa Loompa tuba music. He's gonna pull a little bit of Willy Wonka action here to get him psyched up with a little key dot wrapping over top of it.
You have to be a maniac to get pumped up to Oompa Loompa song. You have to be absolutely maniac.
I mean, I can see it. I can put you in a very dark place there pretty quickly. You're sitting in the dark corner before a pregame, a little bit Oompa Loompa. I could see how that could really kind of put you in a different place. And Jean-Luc, all the power to you. So
that could that could potentially whip a Canadian crowd into a frenzy. I don't know.
Right.
we really don't need a whole lot. If you watch any hockey games, they start singing "Ole Ole Ole" in the second period of a game. So doesn't take much to get us excited up here.
Yeah. So we all know sports is important growing up. Did you play any sports growing up, and who were some of your favorite athletes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up in and around the Chicago area in like the 80s in the Michael Jordan era, right? So that was, that was my guy. Let's see. So yeah, I played a ton of basketball when I was a kid. Took that as far as I could, which was not very far. And then it's one of those things that I've kind of kept into adulthood. But like obviously it was a blessing and a total pleasure growing up in the Michael Jordan era. But it was also it did a lot of damage to you if like you tried to ever model your game after him, right? Like growing up idolizing Michael Jordan had you working on all of the wrong things, right? Because like there's maybe 50 people alive at any given moment who should even try to do any of the things that Michael was so good at, and the rest of us should just work on shooting, right? And I never did that, so I worked on all the wrong things.
How many times did you jump from the free throw line?
Yeah, and land like 7 feet short of the basket. Yeah, plenty of times.
All of us.
Nice.
The only thing I had down from Michael Jordan was the old tongue sticking out. At least until someone hit me in the jaw and I bit my tongue doing it.
You even did that wrong.
Yeah, I did that wrong. There's nothing that screams out professional basketball player about me in any way, shape, or form. So
I spent all of high school just trying to like touch the rim and then trying to dunk, and no time shooting.
No fundamentals.
Which
Nice.
Slight mistake.
Nice.
So I do know that you do a little bit of long distance running. Were you a long distance runner in high school, like between basketball and whatever else you had going?
That's actually one of those things where like you get to a certain age and like all sports sort of converge on running, you know, like I don't know, I'm ancient now, right? So like the idea of me getting all my friends together for like pickup games is really hard. You know, I got to a point where I was like, I was still playing actively like rec league basketball, but to be in the good game, you know, I was like the worst guy on the floor, and I was still hanging in the good game, but like it's no fun to just be barely hanging on to your pickup game, right? So I gradually got into running. Like my wife wanted to run a marathon, so I did that with her, and it was horrible. I didn't train properly for it, and so like once you fail at a thing, that can be a great motivator, right? So like I thought, man, I should try to do this well, but there's a lot of work that goes into doing it well. And then my daughter, who's in college now, she's a runner in college, was just super gifted at it, and so we kind of got into that like local running culture because she was really good and threw herself into it. And so yeah, I've been, and then it was the only thing that I could find to do during COVID, you know.
Right.
So I spent basically all of last, like you're not going to get your friends together for a pickup game in the year 2020. It just wasn't happening. So, you know, ramped up the mileage a little bit. Probably gonna throw myself into another marathon when we get through.
How many miles do you do a day? How many miles you get in a day?
It's really bad. I've got myself up to like 55 to 65 per week. So each day is a little different, but it's a lot.
That is a lot.
But I think of it in terms of time investment, right? It's like maybe I'm running like 8 to 9 hours a week. That's like 2 rounds of golf, and I don't golf. So like the normal thing that a dude would be doing, I'm not doing, and I'm just replacing that with yeah.
Like, why am I picturing right now like that Mel Gibson, What Women Want, that little monologue there where it's like just you in the road running, and then here comes Andy just kind of running down by the beach or something, just him in the road with the headphones.
It's also
on.
it's moderately productive because all of my podcast listening happens while I'm running, right? Like I'm not totally vegging out the entire time.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good double up of time. I like that.
So
I do a lot of
get
book
much further,
on tape when I run. I'm getting into book on tape thing.
Yeah, you're not going to catch me run. We do all our running with skates on up here. Before we get a little bit any further here, I know you can twist your ankle when you run, but I hear you have a habit, or it's happened once or twice, where your arm's been twisted to changing your AVI. There, what's the story behind the Twitter AVIs?
Oh man, you've done like deep research.
Yeah, some people call it research. The judicial system may call it stalking. At
some point, late night at a bar with Matt Harmon, I had changed my Twitter AVI to a picture of his dog. I don't even remember what the conversation was that led me to use Matt Harmon's dog as my Twitter AVI, and then it was just up there for like 2 years. And at some point, like my wife and child were like, what is that? Whose dog is that? And I'm like, oh, that's Matt's dog. I'm not really sure when I agreed to make him my AVI. And they were like, it's not even our dog. Like we have a dog, and our dog has never been featured in that. Like you need to change that now.
Right now.
Charlie's a good looking dog, though. We have to admit, Charlie's a good dog.
Yes.
Yeah, Charlie's kind of a prima donna, though, and Charlie felt like Charlie was responsible for my brand more than me, and so we needed to go our separate ways. Plus, Charlie's politics are very problematic. I can't have that.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, diving more into your life. Tell us about a decision that changed the trajectory of your life, and you can't say that it is marriage or birth of a child.
No, it's probably the decision to like jump into sports writing generally. Like not that long after my daughter was born in 2001, and not that long after that, I made the decision that I was an English major in college. I don't really remember a time when I didn't think of myself as a writer, and I tried really hard after college to like land a job in sports writing. I was a stringer for a little while at some local papers. That doesn't pay any money. I was like an associate editor at a trade publication. in the baking industry that didn't pay any money and it was terrible, right? And so it was just, it was really hard to get a foothold in writing professionally. So I took a corporate job that I liked at a good company and loved the people there, still good friends with all of them. But I wasn't writing anymore. And I felt like I was sort of letting that, that had always been so like central to my identity, like through high school, grade school, college, all of that. I was like, I need to, if I don't do it now, when my child is just born and perhaps I can stay home with her. So it was basically that decision to like leave a corporate job, watch my daughter by day, and then try to launch a freelance writing career that was a big sort of hinge point in my professional career. I might I don't know, financially, maybe it would have still been better to have kept the corporate job. Like I was liking it. I don't have any complaints about it. I learned a bunch of good habits there. It was great. But there's just something to be said for, like raising a kid in a home where like your child sees that their parents do what they love. Like that's really good. That I felt like was, a great environment that we could give my daughter. And it was just, it's that was a big turning point for me. That's a hard thing to decide to do, to, leave an income behind for a very uncertain income. But I'm glad I did it.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Tara, before Tara jumps in here, we mentioned the novelist kind of stuff off the get-go. We're just talking about here with the trajectory of your life and the writing. Now, I did some Google research, but I'm always afraid to kind of throw it out because not everything on Google is 100% accurate. What were some of those novels or books that you kind of put out there? I know was there some children's books in there too?
Okay, so let's see, we're probably 5 years into my sports writing career, and I've I'm writing for ESPN at the time. I was doing a lot of stuff. It was freelance stuff, but I was doing a lot of stuff for Page 2 and Page 3. I don't know if people remember that, but I would, I had pretty regular features in there. And somebody wrote me out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, you should write a YA novel." And I was like, "What's a YA novel?" And they were like, it's a novel for teenage girls. And at the time, I'm writing for basically the people who are reading me are like middle-aged men, right? So I was like, wow, I have entirely the wrong voice going here if that's who's finding me. But it was a representative from a book packager, and the way like a lot of young adult novels and middle grade novels get written is there are companies that come up with like a sort of 2-page, at least this was what it was like 15 years ago. There are companies that will come up with like a 2-page sort of synopsis, a little 2-page plot outline, and they just go find writers. And so I wrote a bunch of sample chapters on spec of something because I was still at a point in my career where I never said no to anything. Like if somebody wanted me to write for them, I was like, yeah, sure. And these guys were actually paying, which was amazing. So I wrote some sample chapters for them of a book that became, the book was called All the Way. And then the company that I was working with, the book packager, was actively working with like film companies. So it became the movie Sex Drive. The book and the film are super different. Like the film is like wildly inappropriate and not exactly the tone of the book, but it was still a really fun thing to be a part of. Fun cast, fun project.
So yeah, I wanted to confirm that was one of the ones. I didn't want to just automatically assume that this book turned movie about whatever it was, because there's that, and there's like the Fast and the Furious came up there when I was doing my research. I'm like, I'm gonna let him tell me what's out there rather than me just assume that Google has this down on point here. So
yeah, that last book that I wrote, The Fast and the Furious, was really fun. It was like it's a dog agility story. It's like a boy and his dog and a dog agility story. Super fun to write, and that was more for like middle grade boys. Really enjoyed it. Did a lot of readings associated with that one. That was cool.
But this is where Charlie's politics really affected the book, right?
yeah. That's exactly right.
I love it. It fits perfectly in with what you were saying regarding, the importance of your kids seeing you happy and seeing their parents happy in what they're doing. And a lot of what you said resonated with me because I kind of, I too wanted to go into journalism. I was an English minor, but focused on broadcasting for major, and then went into corporate after struggling to find a job in journalism as well. So I totally identify with that. In talking about the changes and being able to go from corporate into that passion career of yours, what are some of the changes that you've seen in yourself personally along this journey?
Oh man. Yeah, that's a good question too. The big thing that you have to get over and actually I feel a little bit like, a few years of corporate life prepared me for this. Like you have to get ready for rejection if you're gonna be a freelance writer, because nobody's waiting for your pitch. No editor out there is just waiting for Andy Behrens to lob an email at them and attempt to pitch a story, right? So like you've just got to get ready for the idea that a huge percentage of the things that you send out are either not going to get replied to at all, they're going to get a no, they're going to get a we like this but we don't think you're the person to write it. You're going to get all manner of rejection, and you need to be able to shrug that off. And that is really hard when you're in your 20s, you're in your early 30s, you're trying to dive into a new career, to confront that much seeming negativity, right? Like it's just really hard. And I imagine that it weeds out a lot of people, right? Because there are folks that are just like, no, I'm not signing up for this. I'm not going to get, I'm not going to get a dozen rejections a day. It's hard. You just hear no a lot. And even when you hear yes, and you're working with an editor, there's a lot of people who really struggle to react well to edits. One of the first places that I wrote for was the local alternative weekly in Chicago, the Chicago Reader. Just great staff, great editorial staff, but man, they took a red pen to everything. And I'm like, I think of myself as a pretty good writer, and I have a certain bit of my ego associated with that, and it's hard, right? Like the first time that somebody just tears your stuff apart and is like, they're like, we love this, we love the idea, we love the way that you phrased this one thing, and then here's page after page of red edits, and it's just a hard process to go through if you really undergo like a rigorous editorial process. I don't know how much that happens outside of like print journalism though, right? Like it certainly never happened when I've written for the web. Like I went from that. I went from like a process where like to get, to not even a cover story for the Reader, but like a, mid-magazine feature just felt like I'd been through the ringer every time. And then, a couple of years later, I'm writing for ESPN.com, and it would be an audience of like however many million people, and they'd just throw it up on the site and then edit it on the back end, right? Like it was it was wild. It was, and I'm not calling out ESPN there. That's everywhere. That's what I do now. I post it myself, and then it can get edited on the back end. That's just like how we operate now, which is just an entirely different world. But that is a really difficult, that is a very long answer to your question, but that is a really difficult hurdle to get through. And the process of getting and giving feedback in corporate life, I think prepared me a little bit for that. I think if I'd actually dove into that straight out of college, it might have wrecked me.
Yeah. And maybe when we transitioning from, a editorial onto online, and you're leaving that editor giving you all those comments, maybe it transitions less from the company like ESPN doing and more to the readers that are on there vocally making comments.
Yeah. Yeah. And not that like I've learned over time not to pay a great deal of attention to the comment section of any story. And I've learned how disassociated the comment section can be from the actual material, and how few people in the comment section are actually reading it. But for the first couple of years that your stuff is getting commented on, you're reading every single one of them, and you're just like craving positive feedback, right? I've learned not to do that, but yeah, that's painful as well.
Major.
Yeah. It look like we have a question from John Luke here. Let's see, I got an unsolicited question. I can't read. I can't see.
Yeah, so John Luke's basically asking, what do you see as the path of least resistance to navigating a career in the industry?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to have, I mean, it's like, it's so, it seems so relative. Maybe it's not. Like I'm so detached from actually jumping into the industry. But obviously, when I got into it, you basically had to affiliate with a major media company somehow, which is not an easy path, right? Like that is just a very difficult thing to do. Like latching onto these jobs is really hard, and people don't give them up once they've got them willingly, right? So that is really difficult. But like I got into the business at a time that Twitter didn't exist. There was no comparable social platform, right? And I just feel like I've seen so many people rise through the industry now and become like significant voices in the industry just based on like their online personality and just having a voice that is different from everybody else and engaging productively with the rest of the community, right? Like, and so that is just, I mean, I can't even, I'm not going to start naming people, because if I start naming people, I'm going to forget people, but there's just so many people that are really talented, that are young and up and coming in the industry. And they've just, they've made their own platform because they had access to social platforms like Twitter and whatnot. And they're really good and they have unique voices. And that's kind of the best thing. You can also, I mean, this is difficult, but you can also create an indispensable product, right? Like you look at the way Matt Harmon has made a name for himself and all that he's done with reception perception. I mean, that was a huge void. There's still a huge void I think in NFL analytics, and there's still all kinds of new and different ways. Like baseball is a little bit more mature, but there's all kinds of new and different ways to look at football, and we're still seeing people create really unique products.
Yeah. You kind of answered it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to zoom in a little bit more on it. When you decided to make fantasy sports more than just a hobby, like what was that conversation like with your wife? Like, hey, I want to write about a fantasy football thing here, and I'm going to quit this corporate job. How did that go?
She's super supportive.
Yeah.
Actually, like, we have a great relationship. I love my wife. Like it was not that difficult. And we'd met in college, and she knew what I had always wanted to do, right? I knew what she always wanted to do, and they complemented each other. And the other benefit of my like staying home was that my wife's career was able to really take off too, right? Like all of a sudden my wife could travel at a moment's notice and doesn't feel bad about, oh gosh, I'm going to leave our baby at home or whatever. Like it freed her up to be a better employee and to be able to say yes to everything in ways that I think she probably felt reluctant to before. So it ended up being good for both of us. I mean, it was stressful, right? Because you go from having a very steady income to a wildly variable income, depending on who was saying yes to my pitches. But she's super supportive. It was actually, and I was just super fortunate to be in the position to even entertain the idea, which few people are. So that was, I was just very lucky to be there.
Nice.
The job, by the way, is wildly different now from what it was when I got into it. Like, first of all, when I entered the fantasy space, and I didn't like dive right into fantasy, right? I just wanted to write about sports. And that was becoming increasingly easier because like the web was opening things up to like, if you were just good, if you just had a good voice, you didn't have to go through the pains of rising up through a newspaper system, right? Which is not a meritocracy at all. And you just have to be there a long time in order to like get the back page. But when I jumped into it, like I had been playing fantasy for a long time, so it felt natural to me to accept some fantasy work too. But the job was writing. Like when I got hired at Yahoo, my whole job was just to write like 4,000 word columns a week. That's what they expected of me. And then I had no experience doing anything on camera. I had no experience doing anything on radio. I feel like I still sound that way, but that was just not part of my background. Like I would encourage people if they're 20, they're in college and they're still thinking about doing this, take the route that Tera did, right? Like get a broadcasting background, because the first thing that's going to be expected of you is to be good on camera and to be adept on camera.
Yeah. Just to pivot just a little bit. What's your favorite league? I know we all have like the home leagues we love. We started with like, what's the oldest league you're in, or what's your favorite one?
Oh man. Well, I probably have a couple. One of them is a baseball league. I don't know how long I've been in it. Maybe I've been in it 25 years. Maybe I've been in it 20 years. It's like an NL only league. Bitter rivalries. The rule changes are weirdly, like, we change rules every year. But it's fun, and we retain a lot of players. Anything that I really love, any league that I'm super attached to, is both about the people, and it's a dynasty league or a keeper league in some way, right? So we're like retaining a bunch of the same players, and you end up with like emotional attachments to players and teams and things like that you just don't get in redraft formats. And then like, this is weird too. Like, I'm in a football league that was started. One of my best friends in the industry is Chris Harris, and we've known each other for a really long time. He's one of the first people that like allowed me to write for his site. Love him, really good person. And I've been in a football league with him for maybe 20 years. There's no buy-in. Like, nothing is on the line except for a trophy, right? But it's hotly contested, and we keep 2 or 3 players every year. So everybody's really attached to their most of these guys all know each other from college. So there's just bitter rivalries there. It's a really fun league, and he's an amazing commissioner. And like, oftentimes the commissioner just makes these things, right? Like, the commissioner creates a vibe that you really get attached to. So that league, which again, we play for no money, we just play for a traveling trophy, is probably the football league that I am most interested in every year.
Nice.
Speaking of those bitter rivalries that kind of make that league, when you get Yahoo with ESPN, with CBS, you basically get the Kings Classic, which is like everyone kind of coming together. I'm down in the Blanded division, so I haven't quite got the Jim Brown kind of competitive thing that you guys got going on up there in the gold jacket room. But talk about that Kings Classic a little bit, and just what it's like getting together with all your peers and stuff in the room, drafting live. We were able to draft live this year as opposed to even maybe last year when that was not the case.
What a success story for Bob Lung. And Bob, if people don't know him well, he's such a man. I love that guy because he's so loyal to his hometown. His hometown is Canton. He's so loyal to the Hall of Fame. He's just such a good spokesperson for it. And he threw that whole thing together. And the first Kings Classic was the first time I'd been to the Hall of Fame, and they were wonderful. It's an amazing place to have a draft, and just that opportunity to get together. I've been going to like the FSGA conventions for a long time, but even those are usually the people that are atop the sort of corporate and marketing and sales hierarchies at a lot of these fantasy companies. It's not the people who do what we do. It's not the actual content producers. So for Bob to have created not only the Kings Classic, but then the Fantasy Football Expo on top of that, and to have brought together like a few hundred people who actually do this job, a whole bunch of people who'd known each other online forever, but had hardly ever spent time together. I mean, I can't say enough great things about the event that Bob put together and how successful it was, how fun it was. And obviously it's great to get in a room with your friends in the industry that you've known for so long.
Yeah, just to further to that, I'm not a toucher in any way, shape, or form. I've never been more inappropriately touched in one weekend than I was down in the expo. You met like all strangers.
Well, let me just apologize on behalf of Brad Evans. I assume that's who you're talking about.
But it really, a bunch of these strangers from Twitter. That's the beauty that Bob put together. It wasn't just the content creators; it was the content consumers that were coming down there as well and checking it out, and people coming up like they know one of each other because of how that communication on the Twitter kind of went leading up to it. And I think it was kind of a good thing just to get everyone out of their houses. And
it's one thing to have the idea. We've all had the idea. Yeah, it would be great to get all these content producers together, but to execute on the logistics of that thing, I mean, it was a monster. And Bob basically enlisted his his family was, lugging boxes around, and
his wife was out there doing work.
yeah. Like the whole squad was on it, and just an incredible feat of organization and dedication to the industry. I can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah, I met Matt in person. We've been doing this podcast for a while now, and met Matt in person out there. So it was a good experience.
Yeah.
It's amazing how we can literally spend like, because we're together weekly and we can be very connected, but not actually have that chance to meet each other. So I am hopefully going to be there next year. But moving on back to podcasts. Tell us about some of your most memorable podcaster interviews.
Oh, wow. That's a good question too. I've actually in the last year or so, just within Yahoo, I've ended up doing a bunch of athlete interviews. Those have been really fun, and that's another thing that I just had no experience with, right? Outside of being a reporter early on in my career, but doing it on camera has been really fun, been pretty interesting. Just talked to Ryan Tannehill this week. That was weird, and it was fun because we did it in association with this segment that we do each week called Fantasy Bad Beats, right? Where it's just like your horrible fantasy loss from the weekend prior. And we already had this time scheduled with Tannehill, and as it happened, he took a knee at the end of the Monday night game. And one of the most common complaints that we always get in Fantasy Bad Beats is that people lose because their quarterback takes a knee at the end of the very last game of the week, and it is just gutting, right? Like you go from being up half a point to down half a point because the guy technically loses a yard. And so we had the opportunity to talk to Tannehill about that, and it was pretty hilarious. I think I got him to commit to getting his backup Logan Woodside on the field for those situations moving forward.
Nice.
Because that'd be one of those things that helps everybody going forward.
Yes, right. The worst, and we were joking about this too. Kyler Murray takes those snaps from shotgun, so like it's nothing for Kyler Murray to lose 9 rushing yards or 12 rushing yards at the end of the game, kneeling down out of shotgun, which is just the dopiest thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's crazy how fantasy sports are becoming something that athletes are happy to interview about, happy to associate with. I know you've got Austin Eckler that's over there at Yahoo as well, doing a regular show. So, I mean, it's really impressive and really fun for, just a fantasy fan in general to have that athlete interaction going on.
Yeah, and I feel like athletes started to get it pretty early on, and I know that the feedback that athletes can sometimes get from fantasy managers is terrible. Right? Like sometimes it's just awful. Like you can be a winning player who's coming off a game where the team wins and all that, but by God, if you took a knee at the goal line, situationally, people get really mad about it. I get it. That's hard on athletes, but I think athletes in general have recognized that it's so good for their personal brands, for their exposure. It's like fantasy, you guys all know this, anybody watching this knows it, like it just makes you so much better informed as a sports fan. It's I feel like now looking back, like when I was in college and I thought I knew everything, how little I really knew about sports and how much more I know and how better informed I am from just simply from playing fantasy, not even from doing this for a living, but just from being in 3-4 fantasy leagues makes you such a well-informed fan.
For sure. But if you weren't into fantasy, I know we've talked about your career before. We've talked about your writing. There's a ton of things that if you weren't working within fantasy industry right now that you could be doing. But is there something other than that you would maybe be doing if you weren't doing this job right here?
I'm qualified to do so few things. That's really how I feel. I mean, like seriously, if I weren't writing about fantasy sports, I'm sure I would have continued sports writing. Like I loved it. I loved writing sports features. That I got to spend a little bit of time with. Like I was just thinking, this has been like I've been like kind of so on Sunday, I almost never take the day off from like watching NFL games on a Sunday, but the Chicago Sky were playing in the WNBA finals, and my wife and I went to we had season tickets this year. We went to the final game of that. Like that was pretty emotional because like I had begun when years ago. I don't know how many years ago, 16 years ago, I'm freelancing. And like one of the first big cover stories that I had for the Reader was the Chicago Reader here locally was a piece on Candace Parker when she was like a junior in high school. Right. So I feel like that story was a big deal for me professionally. And so I've always like been a huge fan of Candace because she was so nice. Her family was so nice. It was a well-received story and all that. And so it was really gratifying to like see her. I don't even know what got me on this, but it was really gratifying, obviously, to see her win a title with like my hometown team was just phenomenal. And the attachments that I have felt to subjects after writing like longer form sports features, I just love that stuff. And I loved doing it. And I like, that is probably what I would be doing. It would be something very close to what I'm doing now if I weren't doing what I'm doing.
So we mentioned that novelist background. Books turn movie type thing. We've seen that happen in your career. So I want to get really in tune. This might be a very deep question here. I'm going to try and keep the politics out of it here. But if you were recasting Fast Times at Ridgemont High, starring only fantasy analysts, who would be starring in that movie?
Oh man,
Andy Behrens' production of it.
There's a lot of pressure here. There's a ton of pressure here because Pianowski has to be in it somewhere. He's a huge fan of the movie, and I don't want to screw up his role. So like I don't want to assign him to the wrong role in that. Probably the most fraught selection is who plays Sean Penn's character. Is that Brad Evans? It's probably Brad Evans. I know the hair is exactly wrong, but
we
probably
can
Brad.
fix that. We could probably fit him in as Spicoli there. I could see that. I could pull it off.
Yeah. Who's Mr. Hand? Bob Harris, probably Mr. Hand.
So it's something kind of fun to think about. You're just trying to recast all these characters from a movie. I know you really enjoy this movie too, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, it's a classic. It's an American classic. Who doesn't?
So heading back over to the industry, we touched on this a little bit. You mentioned that you started off as a writer and then moving on to camera without the previous camera experience. But when we have these shows, we talk a lot about with people who have just a long history in the industry, all of the changes that we've seen. So what are some of the changes that you've seen within the industry?
One of the biggest things is that when I've been doing it long enough that so it's a really small number of people who were doing it when I got into the industry, right? Like I started at Yahoo in 2007. I'd been at ESPN probably 3-4 years before that, doing things like when you entered the industry, you were just a fantasy writer, and it was sort of expected that you didn't specialize in a particular sport. And that's been one of the biggest changes that I've seen, right? In addition to the fact that you were pretty much only, in print, nobody put you on camera. It was a huge deal, by the way. Like the first time that fantasy guys were getting on camera in any way, like I'm thinking about like Jeff Erickson with like MLB Network and Funston and Carabell when they would get on ESPN. Like those guys doing a good job was a huge deal for our industry. And those guys not totally face planning was just like, if that had happened, that would have been bad, and maybe things drag on differently for the fantasy industry generally. But like when you were hired to do it, you were a total generalist, and it was just understood that Funston would be covering basketball, and he would be covering football, and he would be covering baseball. And now you're allowed to really be sports specific, and there are all these fantasy services that do such a great like deep dive into individual sports. And I Pianowski and I talk about this sometimes. I feel like such a relic because I'm like, how many people are out there like writing about and talking about multiple sports? It's just super rare. Everybody's either football or they're baseball, and those groups don't even know each other particularly well, right? Like there's only a few bridges between the fantasy baseball community and the fantasy football community and the fantasy basketball community. And I feel like I'm one of the few people who serves that capacity. I think that and the fact that you don't get to just write to do the job are the two biggest changes that I've observed.
Yeah, it's interesting that, the very specialized within one sport. I guess it's, has become kind of difficult because the more advanced we get in the industry, the more
Mhm.
caveats there are. We've got so many different types of leagues you dive into. You can do Debbie, you can be IDP, you can specialize in so many different things. So I wonder if it gets just a little hard to be someone that is specializing in multiple sports. I mean, that takes a special talent to really know all the players, the strategies, and the intricacies on multiple sports.
Yeah, you're so right. Like in football now, you can't even just be a football expert, right? You have to be a Debbie expert. You have to be a Dynasty expert. You have to be a redraft expert. You can't even, it's not even enough to say that you're like, an analyst of a particular sport. You have to be an analyst of a particular type of game within a niche within a sport.
And when you said that those guys were on, get on TV for the first time, was there a moment where you guys all kind of was just like, oh my gosh, I hope they do well. Hopefully do well. Then it was like, yeah, we did it. Was it that? Did you guys even know that it was a thing?
I do remember rooting for those guys when because I barely knew Jeff Erickson at the time when he was getting on, MLB Network or, while I was writing for ESPN, I don't think I even really knew Funston for a few years because I was off in one editorial area and he was off in fantasy, and fantasy never bumped up against anybody else. But I always rooted for those guys when they were on. I was, I still feel that way when I see whether it's Barry, whether it's Mike Clay, whether it's anybody with any of the major networks, when they're like on TV and on major platforms and crushing it, it's just good for everybody.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the things that makes the industry so unique, is that it's different than just the sports industry in general. With journalists, it's very personal industry where you're wanting everyone to succeed on a different levels, as high as Matthew Berry, are very interactive with, podcasts like us. So it's just very interesting how everyone is so connected and supportive of each other.
Yeah, just the mere fact that, and it's a good business strategy for them, obviously, but the fact that ESPN has integrated fantasy so completely into their just regular football programming is huge for the rest of us, right? The fact that it just gets out there as a very basic part of being a sports fan has been a big deal for the industry. The fact that they don't just wall it off in the fantasy section of the website, and if you're one of those fantasy guys, you should go there, but we're not gonna ever let Chris Berman talk about it. We're not gonna ever have it on our major flagship shows. The fact that they've embraced it so fully, however many years ago that was a huge deal.
Yeah, we all know relationships are 90% of the game. Who are some of the people that helped you along the way in your career?
Oh yeah, there's almost too many to name. I feel like actually the Matt Berry coaching tree is just as big as anyone's, right? Because I go back to the Talented Mr. Roto days. Brad Evans goes back to that as well. And the first little foray that I had into any sort of fantasy writing was actually when Chris Harris, my good friend, I think he won, I don't even know what they called it, the open pen contest, something like that at Talented Mr. Roto. He won that, and they assigned him something that he was not in any way fit to do, right? Chris is a huge football fan at the time. He was this huge Red Sox fan. And they assigned him an NBA column for some game that what was it called? I don't even remember the name of the game, but it was something that NBA.com wanted to launch, and they kind of farmed out the analysis of it to TMR. And they assigned that to Chris, and he reached out to me and was like, what the hell? This is not anything that I should be doing. You have to help me with this. And so I got involved with Talented Mr. Roto that way, and just being part of that sort of Matt Berry family was super helpful. Helped me obviously get a foothold with ESPN fantasy for a little while. And then nobody's more supportive within the industry than Brandon Funston. He's been great, and Brandon never wants any credit for anything, but he's super helpful to everybody whose path he crosses. He's been great. Brad Evans, one of my best friends, super, just really supportive people. Almost everybody who was there in the early days of fantasy is just incredibly supportive of one another.
Nice. And last question here. For those of us trying to make it in the industry, what's some advice you can give us some fatherly advice.
Yeah, I mean, well, you said it in your last question. A lot of this is about relationships and how you treat people. You know, when we have opportunities like this, and how you treat people online, how you interact with people, and I always encourage people to, you know, if I like, it's never been easier to interact with almost anybody in this industry on social, and there have just been so many careers that have taken off over the past few years, just based on relationships that people build on Twitter, relationships that people build on platforms like this. So throw yourself into it as much as you possibly can, and obviously it goes without saying, and this industry doesn't usually have a problem with it, but you know, be respectful of everyone, be respectful of everybody's opinions, and help folks out along the way.
I do have one more question. It's not really fantasy relevant here, but how would you defend an Artis Gilmore hook shot?
It's utterly indefensible. Artis was but before Michael was my favorite player, Artis Gilmore was my favorite player when I was like a little kid. Loved everything about him aesthetically. I feel pretty strongly he should have been one of the NBA's all-time top 75. I think I tweeted that yesterday. Artis would be one of the best athletes in today's game. Clearly, utterly indefensible hook shot. The man was 7'2", you know, could leap out of the gym. There's no defense for it.
How do you find this stuff, man?
Well, it's funny because even before you tweeted it out, I had Artis Gilmore here in my backup notes here, as well as like the University of Iowa. I was going to make some kind of Iowa joke here based on last week's college football. I decided not to. Usually I take a shot at Tera and Clemson here. We had JL talking a little bit earlier, but I've got nowhere to say because we're not going to get into that either. But,
you know what? I still have this a million years ago, at least 20 years ago. I wrote this story when eBay was just becoming a thing. I wrote this story about all the, you know, it seems crazy to say that this was ever a story, but I wrote this feature about all the sports memorabilia that was available on eBay when the site was just launching, right? And I bought Artis Gilmore's game-worn shorts from, I don't even know which All-Star game, like the 81 or some All-Star game. So I've still got them sitting in a drawer upstairs. It says West on the side, I believe, little stars. Tiny shorts for a 7'2" man. I'm not
how many
sure
times?
How that works.
How many times have you put them on? That's the question. How many times have you put them on and run around the house?
More than one time.
Dunk on your daughter with the shorts on.
Matt, you're
yeah, no, I was just kind of listening and enjoying the whole thing here. With that said, Andy, thanks again for coming on the show here. Just kind of, we know we could find you on Yahoo Fantasy there, doing your thing each and every week, each and every day, not just on the football side, but as well as MLB side. You look at the Fantasy Pros numbers and statistics and accuracy. You've been one of the most accurate rankers on both football and baseball, which is kind of a major hat tip to you, because a lot of us can't even get one thing right on football, let alone hitting on two fronts there. So where else could people kind of find you right now? What are you up to? What do you got planned?
Yeah, there's, I contribute to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast. It's a pod that comes out every weekday, so people can check that out. The big flagship Yahoo show during NFL season, Fantasy Football Live, is available all over Yahoo's platform 90 minutes before kickoff on Sundays.
Well, yeah, one of the greatest fantasy articles that was ever kind of put out there was that daily fantasy sports article that you kind of did way back when there, that you kind of put the fantasy world kind of on a map there, so to speak there. So that was something I wanted to make sure I thanked you for putting that out there so that we could consume it in our daily
I'm actually, it's
adventures.
funny. I'm writing this email newsletter now for like Yahoo Fantasy Plus subscribers, and it's a total joy. Like it's been a long time since I've written like daily articles, right? Like that's barely a part of the job anymore. You're on podcasts all the time. You're on video all the time. Nobody asks you to write. So that's been really fun as well.
And then Tera, where can people find you here? What do you got going on this week?
This is the big wrap up of the week. So this was a great way to end it. But yeah, you can catch me weekly, with Fantasy Pros videos. I think I have one that just came out. I'll post that on Twitter, but Fantasy Pros, Fantasy Alarm here, of course, my favorite home in the world. And then I also, have been remiss to keep forgetting. I'm going to be starting hopefully next week, doing some content for Osimo, probably some DFS content and fantasy content as well. So you can find me in those places. My best place to find me. And all of my content is Twitter. It's all there.
And Major, I know where to find you on Sunday, but let the people know where to find you.
I probably don't even know where to find me. I get it wrong every time, but check me out on Fantasy Points, Extra Points Morning Show. Me and my boy Nick, we're talking player props, helping you guys make some money. So tune in.
Hey, and what else can you do over at Fantasy Points? Can you is there a promo code that you can use?
Yeah, you can go to fantasypoints.com, Viper, or it's a 21 Viper 10, and get that 10%, 15%. I don't know. I suck at this part. You know what I mean? So just go
All right.
log in.
He can't see.
Click.
Remember.
I can't see, and it's so small at the bottom there. Yeah, 21 Vipers 10. Get your 10% off Fantasy Points. Subscribe. It's the greatest website ever in the world.
So we had a comment earlier on in the show, Andy. I don't know if you caught it there, but Kyle there, also Canadian, kind of threw out there the one guy with glasses on can't actually read the screen. Head over to fantasypoints.com. Use promo code 21Vipers10. Get 10% off that subscription today.
So let me explain. My left eye, I'm like almost blind, and this one is like not that good. So I'm like squinting, trying to read that thing. It's not a good look. So leave me alone.
With that all said, make sure to head over to the Dynasty Vipers Network there on YouTube. Check out the Behind the Grind series. We've had some of your favorite analysts come on the show, share their stories. It's a timeless classic that you can make sure to catch on. Like I said, all your favorites are on there. And it just talks about each and every one of their journeys, much like Andy shared with us today. Make sure you check that out. And with that all said, you know,
wait,
you can run a mile. You can run a mile in another man's shoes, but not all of us can wear Artist Gilmore shorts. Thank you for joining the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast. This is episode number 97, and we'll see you next time. Take care.